This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I'm just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
I am just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
I am Ara Bagdasarian, the founder of OmniAlert and board president of ZeroNow, and welcome to this ZeroNow session's Lessons Learned from Uvalde. Sessions is a forum to exchange big ideas and best practices for safer schools nationwide. ZeroNow is a stakeholder alliance formed to drive ideas, innovation, and investment to advance school safety. As a membership-based nonprofit, ZeroNow facilitates collaboration between industry, association, and education partners to foster new solutions to keep our campuses and schools safe and secure. Before we get started, I just want to recognize our sponsors for making this possible. Thank you to Access Communications, Additional Corporation, OmniAlert, Johnson Controls, IACLEA, the VTV Family Outreach Foundation, NASPA, the Student Affairs Administrators in Higher Education, and Campus Safety Magazine and Conferences. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a member as an individual or as an organization, please visit zeronow.org. Let's go ahead and introduce our very special panelists today, some serious experts here. First, we have Brandon Rhone. So Brandon is an award-winning veteran law enforcement executive and one of the nation's highly respected school safety and active shooter experts. Recognized as a leader in policing and public safety initiatives, Brandon has experience advising some of the highest level education leaders across the country. Brandon has trained tens of thousands of individuals in proactive options based on violent critical incident active shooter ALICE training. Welcome, Brandon. Glad to have you back again. Next,
thanks, Art. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Guy Grace. Guy, welcome. This is our first time with ZeroNow. We're happy that you're here with us. Guy has worked in the security field for 35 years. He served for over 3 decades as the Director of Security and Emergency Planning for Littleton Public Schools, a suburb of Denver, Colorado, before retiring in August 2020. Guy was recognized as the 2020 Campus Safety Director of the Year. Guy is a regular speaker at school safety trade conferences and a regular security media commentator for various trade magazines and media. He has diverse hands-on experiences with school safety regarding technology, processes, and emergency response. He also serves as the chairman of the advisory committee for the Partner Alliance for Safe Schools, also known as PASS, and as the strategic safety and security advisor for the Innovative Institute for Fan Experience. Welcome, Guy. And Chris Grollnek. Welcome back, Chris. Great to see you. Chris is an award-winning former police investigator and one of the nation's highly respected police experts in the prevention of domestic terrorism. Chris is recognized as one of the nation's most sought professionals in the active shooter prevention field and is considered the legacy expert. He has appeared on numerous television networks, including Fox, CBS, NBC, ABC, and CNN, and continues syndicated radio broadcast programs. In 2022, Chris helped found and serves on the leadership board of a nonprofit dedicated to the prevention of domestic terrorism, the First Preventers. And I do have my challenge coin here, Chris. Chris also serves on the advisory council for ZeroNow, a nonprofit founded with a goal of ending school violence. Welcome, gentlemen. Glad you could join us. So we're going to start. We had a lot of questions. We typically, the way this works for our participants is if you have questions, please hit the Q&A button in your interface. We'll answer those about halfway through the program. We have a number of different questions that came in as you registered. So we're going to start off with a few of those because we had quite a few that came in today. The first is Dean Skidmore. He asked, what was the biggest failure at Uvalde and how should public safety act to rectify incident management? And we'll start with Chris on that.
Everybody, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And thank you, Ara. So in the name of time, I'm going to get right to this. I believe Dean's question is probably the heart and nexus of what we're talking about from a national conversation. So we have to, as a group, and I'm talking about society to the experts, right? There's probably 10,000 active shooter experts in the country. Ask anyone, they'll tell you, just like surgeons and lawyers, et cetera, on, keyboard commandos. The difference is when the people look at their sector of what they're trying to pass forward, they look at it through the lens of only that. So there's a few of us out there, several actually, that look at these things from the different perspectives of the shooter, right? The people, what I call the 4 Ps, the people, the place, the perpetrator, and the police. And if we break it down to those quads, we can look at the quarters. So how would we say what was the biggest failure? Logical. Police didn't do their job. They didn't go in. I'm a retired police officer. I'm not hating. I'm just saying that we have to respect the 19 dead children and 2 dead teachers over the egos of the people that got their feelings hurt by not doing their job. That's number one. Number two, we have an unrealistic standard by training alert for every officer in the country. That alert is going to be the magic fix or magic bullet. And if we go back to the watershed moment of 1999 Columbine, which was by far not the first active shooter at a school, but just the watershed moment of police have to do something. Let's go fast forward to Uvalde and see what happened. $72 million later into an alert training status for all police, over 110,000 officers trained, over 1 million because it was train the trainer programs, and they still didn't go in. Just because I have the desire to go stop a shooter doesn't mean I have the ability. And because I have a certificate on the wall, 8 to 40 hours of training isn't going to change my mind or thought process when a real bullet comes. And I can say this from an intelligence standpoint. I've been in an active shooter as a policeman at our police department in 2010. And I can tell you, some people run, some people fight. So when we came up with run, hide, fight, we had to delineate what that means. What's the biggest failure? More officers were on standby and on site than were at the Alamo. And not one of them got in a gunfight. And the number one excuse is, what's the biggest failure? We refused to be honest. What's the number one failure that they didn't go in? They were nervous because they'd never been in a gunfight before. Well, let me throw that back to you. Neither was the gunman. So let's just think about that.
Absolutely, Guy. What are your thoughts? I mean, from your perspective, what was the biggest failure? And by the way, Chris, I appreciate that. And we had a number of folks ask about this program, and we're really looking at a constructive approach, because if we look at these tragedies and learn from that, we can work towards getting to zero tragedy. So let's look at this. Let's look at this holistically. Let's look at this from a perspective. Okay, what can we learn? What can we apply today to our schools, to the schools of the folks that are participating on this? So, Guy, what are your thoughts on the biggest that biggest failure at Uvalde?
I'm going to take a different approach than what Chris, and I agree with Chris stated. I'll go for the school side. I think one of the biggest glaring issues, and this happens in many schools across the country, is not doing a risk assessment beforehand and looking at all your different layers of safety and security beforehand, so we can prevent, or how do I say, stop an incident like this, or delay an incident or attack that is going on in the school, and looking at your layers of security. So when I look at analyzing it and talking to others that were on the scene out there, and looking at the school perspective, is looking at, did they put in good access control measures? Obviously not, when we're propping open a door with a rock and doing those types of things. The maintenance of the doors, for example, not working. We've heard that the doors were not working, not looking and making sure that those doors were working before the attack. But also too, when we look at the people's roles and processes and the empowerment piece of the staff there, we've heard information that they had a lot of alerts coming in about trafficking and other issues across the border, and they went into different protocols such as lockdown or a hold or whatever we're going to call that. But I think that there was a lack. Basically, they cried wolf a lot of times, so to say. And there was a complacency from the staff not being able to react to that situation appropriately as they should have. I mean, we could sit here and point fingers at law enforcement all the time, but there is a responsibility. When we look at seconds matter, it's the people's roles, processes, and the safety components that the school district is responsible for putting in place there. So if we look at that, there is a failure there. And I've heard situations from integrators and vendors that work with the school district that they were talked about or told, hey, you should put in an access control system there, and supposedly that did not happen. And it happened, repeated attempts to have them, to encourage them to do that, and that did not happen. So when we look at this, it's, we put in an access control or other security measures, we're looking at it as an all hazards type of sense, when we put these things in, not just for an active threat situation, but to solve different types of security situations. So I think that if anything, I would say, look back and see what happened to that risk assessments they did. Did they implement those risk assessments, and did they take actions to correct what they found in those risk assessments?
Well, let's take a step back. So obviously we're talking about response and physical security and the police response, but were there warning signs ahead of time? Were there things that could have been done to prevent the action from even being initiated? Guy, are you familiar with this?
Well, if you look at the history there, they thwarted an incident beforehand in Uvalde. I believe it was 2018 with a threat that was valid, from what I understand. I don't know, nobody knows all the details, but it was validated. They did that through their social media measures they put in there, and they did implement, pretty good social media detection. But when I look at when we look at an active threat, or a person that do harm or potentially do harm to others, there are often a lot of warning signs beforehand. Like putting out communications to social media, their friends, or on that they want to harm people, or they want to do this and that to the school or attack others in the community. And I think when we look at that, if you look at his history of this individual, which I won't say his name, okay, but there was some things like he posted some images of him with dead cats, dead cats in a bag, and but what I would say, those were private messages that weren't broadcasted out. And I think the biggest key that lesson learned, as we've learned in other cases, is empowering the community to share information when somebody is broadcasting that they're going to do harm to others. I think that's the absolutely critical message I would get from this. Is I think people were afraid to do it, or they didn't know what to do, or they didn't know how to take that. It's not about getting people in trouble. I think what we need to do is take a proactive measure here when we have somebody that's acting out or having mental anguish, that, hey, we recognize that, empower people with that. And I can say in my old district, and I know they still do that now, I'm very proud of what they do and what we've been in the past. We really, lessons learned for us was looking at the big picture of mental health for all of our students and things, not being nannies trying to get them in trouble, but trying to do interventions. But I would say, looking at this poor, this poor community here, and I mean that by what they're suffering through right now, I mean, that's a lot of anguish to say, hey, there was warning signs beforehand and nobody did anything. But I would also look at the individual attacked the school. He's out of school for many months, and for a long time, and we look at that, like, who was following up with him? And I think something, when we have people that are left society or left the community like that, and they're kind of lost, there should be some type of measures in place to basically monitor and try to help that person to get back onto an education platform or to be productive with their lives. That didn't happen.
Could I prep Brandon for just 1 second, Aura? Do you mind, Brandon?
Oh, please, go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, man. So Brandon and I speak a lot, and I think we're on the same sheet here. And Guy just hit about a million hot topics that are absolutely correct and right on spot. The two things that I will add to that is we are, and right now, Aura, you and I have been discussing what we call leakage, right? How many active shooters told somebody of their intent prior to what they did? The FBI reported in 2013, again in 2018, the number is about 47 to 60%. They just can't be sure because we didn't get to all the witnesses. But nothing says, we knew it was going to be this guy, like when CNN shows up or Fox and they have a microphone, they said, oh my gosh, can you do that? And the camera person grabs back. We all knew this guy was crazy or woman was crazy, right? So we can't reduce it to simply mental health, but we have to look at it. If somebody makes a threat, take them at their word, take the appropriate action. That's what I was talking about leading Brandon on with this, because we talked about that before. And then number two was I'd like to create those stats into a real clear picture. Up to 2021, before 2021, the stats were good. 60% of shooters would say something. Hey, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to do whatever. Saw it in Parkland. It's still on Google right now, still on YouTube, still has the same video up. Number two, It's going to change. We know this change is going to come, and it's going to be all the way near 80% of people told you their intention. Well, I can tell you those stats are great, but in the last 10 active shooters, starting with Buffalo, New York, up to Uvalde, okay, plus 100% of the shooters posted a manifesto, their intent, or writings on social media prior to them doing it, and 100% of the people in the community knew that was their intent. And the Uvalde shooter, while most of those messages were private, he was on a war game sending messages to the community. I'm going to be the next school shooter, and this is what I'm going to do when I get in the hallways. That's how, pass it to Brandon with the stats, because me and him, we can talk about this probably all day long.
Yeah, and you're 100% correct there, Chris. And I think it goes back to Guy's point about what are we doing with that leakage, right? And why are we not reporting it? All of these schools and organizations have, these slogans, right? See something, say something, and others ways to report these things. But I think it goes back to, and I had this conversation just a few hours ago in the training. It goes back to that human element, right? The fact that people have to do it. And it can't just be overlooked like, oh, we all knew John Doe was crazy, or we all knew John Doe would do something like this. That does us zero good after the event, right? And all that information, all that leakage that's available that we have, society, we have to, I'll use the term, muster up enough courage to take that information to the necessary resources and allow those folks to do their job so that we could get to that ZeroNow.
Of course, I muted. No, and that is such a critical point that all three of you are making, and and I'm glad that we're focusing on the prevention side of things. And it does involve community, it does involve people. It's not just a technology thing. You can say, well, why can't we just have AI just scrub the internet for people posting things? There are direct messages. There are things that are not going to make it, but making it easy for humans to share to connect that threat information to the proper authorities, the proper threat assessment teams, et cetera. That is absolutely critical. And we're going to talk about the response and options in a second here, but focusing and we talk about this all the time, guys. It's all about, we need to focus on prevention, but when prevention fails, then we need to respond. And so we'll talk about that in a second here, but we're also going to do a deeper dive on the whole mental health, public health, and cultural health issues regarding this in our next month's webinar. But Guy, I think you had additional thoughts on that, on the leakage and community aspect.
Well, I look at that. I believe there would probably be a lot more active shooter incidents that if our schools were not being proactive as they are now. I'm not saying we have a high profile incident in Uvalde, but I believe, and I see it, I believe many schools right now in our country are thwarting incidents right now. And I think that's we got to be cognitive and acknowledge that. And there's a lot of improvement that can be done, okay? But I believe that there is a lot of focus from our school mental health to doing prevention measures on that. But I would also say to you, to everybody in here too, we have a suicide epidemic with teens in our country. And I believe too that when we're talking about mental health and the leakage and things is, not just the active threat situation, but just anything that has to do with harm of any kind, self-harm, harm to others, and going forward, it's just encouraging that you're not being a blabbermouth, you're not being the so-called Karen or whatever people like to describe these, people that, acknowledge that, just going forward. And I believe Brandon said the same thing, is make people comfortable with that. And I look at it as intervention is, we need to have an action on if somebody's making a threat. Yeah, we react to it, we do something with it, but also too, we look at it too, that we're also beforehand trying to help somebody to make better choices and to become a good student or citizen beforehand, before to get to this point. But again, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think the biggest piece I would recommend on reporting is have it be mandated by your state. I think like we look at Colorado, Wyoming, very good programs such as Safe to Tell, very, very valuable. It's a service the school districts are not having to pay for. It's just, you know, those are, I believe, the ways to go in that is mandated by your legislators and things. And it's something a school district must do. I think that when it's not must do, a lot of people don't do it. You know, they think it's going to create problems.
No, absolutely. And we have a question here from, I think it's Dr. Scott Geller. While we're still focusing on the prevention side of things before we move into response, are you aware of behavioral skills training, BST, which is needed to prevent injuries and from active shooters? Is that something that either of you are familiar with?
Well, I think, and the gentlemen here are, you know, doing their training. I think that if they're looking at it, if that's what I would say, like on an active shooter protocol, like, you know, stop the bleed or, you know, psychological first aid and those types of measures that we try to teach in our active shooter programs. But I'll let the other experts, you know, on the ALICE side talk about that here.
And we do want to dive into that, Scott, at our next month, and we'd love for you to be involved in that. All right, so any other thoughts on the prevention side, Chris, Brandon, Guy?
I think Brandon's got something, and I'll follow that up.
I think it goes back to, you know, it's going to be redundant, but I think the redundancy is needed, right? And it's getting people to what Guy said, right? Getting people to that space and place where they are comfortable reporting that information and trusting the system to do its job, right? And I think some folks will say, well, we don't report it because we know nothing's going to get done or nothing's going to happen. And so I think that's another prong to some of the problem is trusting the system to do what their role and their responsibility is with that forwarded information.
Chris.
Right. So I think all those are great points. And without getting ahead of my skis, which happens a lot here, and I apologize, but I just want to mention that, you know, when we think of things like this, especially to that question, we think of things as what does prevention really mean? What does that look like? Well, it depends who you ask and the lens in which you view, going back to my 4P assessment, right? The quadrants or the quarters. So if I'm looking at teaching prevention, I could be teaching police prevention while I'm teaching how to enter a building. And it's the speed, swiftness, or speed, surprise, violence of action that's going to prevent more loss of life. Let's go to what Guy said. Stop the bleed. What Brandon said, evaluate on the redundancy and, you know, double train, or back to the threat assessments. Everything has to be taught to the reality of the person capable of doing it. And it's not reasonable to teach a run, hide, fight strategy and delivered after Sandy Hook, which was a tremendous victory coming forward, right, for the nation, that, hey, here we have something. The problem is, and as you know, we've had discussions at length, we didn't populate it. So I think I just want to take a quick second and tell, especially your viewers, right, this is not a hopeless thing. There are so many things that can be done. It's just a matter of your will and determination of what you want to do, the type of training that you want to get, and the reasonableness of that training that not just your checkbook can afford, but can your body and mind afford it? Because we know from studies, especially that's what prompted this question, right? Your body cannot go where your brain has never been. So you have to take yourself there in scenario-based training. But I'm the first one to say, don't do scenario-based training that's under duress for, 12th grade and below, because we don't light firefighters on fire to let them know it's hot. We should inoculate kids to gunshots, just let them know, hey, it's going to be bad. There are things out there right now that we can incorporate, and they work. And I know we're going to get to that in other questions. So I just wanted to preface that and say, look, have hope. There's no reason to be, naysaying nillies about this. But what we can say is it's very important to learn from history. And if we don't do right now what happened in 1999, move forward and evolve. If you see what happened in Columbine in 1999, all the way up to Uvalde 10 weeks ago approximately, We had great progress that set us back those whole 23 years. We need to take that and step into a new role.
And Guy, let's talk about that progress, because I mean you've been involved in school safety for quite a while, and let's look back at Columbine and things that were learned from that to where we are today. Like Chris mentioned, how we've evolved with school safety, and where do we need to go from here?
Well, I think when we look at the evolution of school safety after Columbine, if we look at the report that went out afterwards, it was improvements on interoperability, bullying, and basically the most common component that was added to schools after Columbine was video management systems, cameras and things, but also too being a lot more proactivity. But the evolution as we looked in the 2000s was we started looking at cameras, we started looking at access control as a school end user. But then, as Chris stated, after a lot of lessons learned came after the Sandy Hook situation, was the empowerment piece of employees, how to deal with these active threat situations. So, but my problem that I see is when we look at what is being marketed to school districts right now, is a lot of technology that, yeah, maybe it could be helpful in an active threat situation. But if you go and buy, somebody was asking questions about gunshot detection, for example, if you don't have your access control squared away, and you don't have your locks in your classroom squared away, the gunshot detection is not going to do you any good. And I think that lessons learned, as we were stating here, as Chris stated, we need to get back to the basics here in K through 12. We need to assess where our access control situations, where our people's roles and processes are. We need to assess, just all of our life safety components and say, do we have what we have? Do we have the things in place to deal with an active threat situation and the myriad of other situations that schools deal with on any given day? I think the problem that we have is there's so many solutions out here, and an end user or K through 12's, end user, a lot of them have no clue how they're going to deploy this technology. And sometimes when you deploy a high-end technology, it does more harm than good because you didn't have your holes. And I hate to say it, it's kind of like, you look at the technology right now, you want it to be things that address multiple hazards, but it's like a chess game. If one component fails, you want the other component to kind of cover for that component that fell. But you also got to look at these as things that we're buying. They're tools. They're tools for the K through 12 end users and for them to use on any given day. And they got to be done. You got to do that the right way. And again, I'm not being against those higher end technologies such as gunshot detection or dress systems and things. I think they're very valuable and they should be implemented. But my point is, you need to get those basics in place. And I would commend Chris for saying that. We need to return. We need to tighten up our holes. And I think that's where we've lost since Columbine. We were filling the holes we had with the basics, but we are not doing that now. We're kind of all over the place again. We need to get back to the basics.
Absolutely. Brandon.
I just want to add to that. When Guy talks about getting back to the basics, I think for me, one of those things is having the right people in the right position. And for budgetary reasons and availability and talent pool, all those things that are out there. But when we talk about our K to 12 space, we have taken a shotgun approach, and we've asked school administrators to function in a role that they were never really educated and trained on in holistic safety, right? Guy and Chris talk about holistic safety. And we are asking our superintendents, our building principals, to take this challenge of really fortifying, securing, having good plans, good policies, good procedures, and on top of the role that they have of putting good education in their buildings, and we're asking them now to take on this new challenge. And so I think one of the things when we talk about getting back to the basics is putting the right people in the right position, right? And go out and get you a trained professional in the safety space to be able to handle that part of the role. Understanding that that role is always going to be in play from now moving forward, right? That safety role is always going to be there. But let's get the right people to handle that. I think if we were to poll a large majority of school administrators and ask them about risk assessments, I think we all would not be shocked at the number of them that are simply just unaware that what a risk assessment is, what it's designed to do, and the need for it, right? And that's because we don't have the right people. I'm not taking anything away from our building administrators, but we are asking them to do something that, quite frankly, by and large, they are not equipped to do.
I'm a little bit jealous right now of your of Jonathan, because I think Brandon just channeled his inner Jonathan during this webinar. And next time I demand props, just so I got that said. And if you've watched any of these, you know what I'm talking about.
That's right.
Sorry, I apologize.
No, that's quite all right.
Help it.
That's quite
Got,
well. You
got 30 seconds on and it's not even to piggyback or dovetail. It's actually the exact same point from a different lens, right?
Sure.
You're not going to get through on a webinar with me on it, or any speech that I give across the country or to any government official, without hearing the spiel I got on fire, right? We have not lost a child in a school fire in 64 years. Why is that? Because you as administrators on this call, you as teachers, access control, technology, problem solvers, the panelists, everybody, we got done with losing children in fire 64 years ago. And specifically to Brandon's point about the capability of an administrator or possibly a building person, to Guy's 1999 forward view of exactly what we talked about, evolving. Listen, we were able to take a fire, translated into 3 words, and what were they? My 4-year-old catches on fire. The fireman comes in, he says, "Hey, little Johnny, what do you do? Stop, drop, roll." Everybody knows it. Okay, catch on fire, stop, drop, and roll. Get under the smoke, crawl out, everybody's happy. Well, let me tell you what we're doing with active shooters, and I would implore everyone on your website, on the call right now, to listen to this. To the recording or whatever, stop what you're doing, clear your mind, and think of this. I'm going to challenge you without giving you an answer, because there is no right answer. If I tell you right now there's an active shooter happening this second at my location, your location, wherever, and you get a message on your phone from smart technology because it outsmarted itself and it tells you, implement, run, hide, fight. 2 seconds later, you get the Alyssa model that says activate active shooter protocols, which is a great model. Then you get another message that says shelter in place. Then the parents get a message out and say there's an active barricaded subject. Then you get the Uvalde effect. Hey, we got a hostage negotiation going on while there's gunshots. Then you get the police saying, "Hey, I don't know what to do. Should I go in or not?" Well, what were you trained to do? So I would argue juxtaposition because this is about Uvalde, the people that didn't go into Uvalde are culpable. Because if they started shooting someone that didn't deserve to be shot, they would be charged. Well, for not shooting somebody and allowing the loss of life, they can be charged. And we've seen this history, right? I'm not advocating for any lawsuits. What I'm saying is, until we hold each other accountable, and I'm talking about us, accountable for what's being taught, we need to consider how we're teaching it. And, the Alice model's great. Alert model's great. Run, hide, fight model's great. Shelter in place great. But where are you sheltering? Where are you running to? Where are you hiding? Where are you fighting? And am I really telling my 9-year-old, "Hey, go fight today because it's going to be a great scene, you against a machine gunner"? I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but the machine gun's going to win. So let's have a realistic conversation, bring it down from the fire model 64 years ago. And instead of rebuilding buildings, rechanging fire codes, and coming up with some active shooter department, we simply make these administrators understand that there are common sense things that we can do. You don't need a gun. You don't need ballistic material everywhere, but you need a layered approach, like the old onion adage about threat assessments. And here's the sad secret about threat assessments, and I'll stop. 100% of active shooters in the past 2 to 5, I would go as far out as 5 years, had an active shooter or threat assessment in place. It's just they didn't know what to do with it and how to do it, because they got it, put it in a 3-ring binder, put it on the shelf or the proverbial folder on the desktop, get to that when we need it. That's not the time to need a plan, and hope is not a strategy. So exactly what Brandon and Guy said, find someone that can communicate with you on your level, no disrespect about what level that is, whether you're a teacher or a police officer, and help you understand, how am I going to move forward to protect everybody that falls under the umbrella of your position. Thank you.
And Chris, this is the date. I wrote it down in my notebook, 1958. That was the last time someone was killed in a school fire. And we can get to that with deaths because of school gun violence. We could get to 0. That's why we're doing this. And, there's a lot of focus on prevention. There's a lot of, we keep going back to there's been leakage. The active assailant has told somebody about it, and building that culture where we do convey that. Let's get ahead of this so we don't have to respond, that we don't have to confront the situation where there's an active shooter in our school. When that does happen, though, Brandon, I'm going to direct this question to you. What should a classroom do if there are gunshots outside the classroom? Let's say the classroom next to the one in Uvalde in Rava Elementary School. What are the options?
So, and I think that's a great question, right? And what you ended your last word there are options, right? Give folks options to be able to do something. For some folks, it's as simple as removing themselves from the dangerous location, right? Going back to the fire safety. We never once were taught, hey, stay in the building till the fire department comes to try to put the fire out, and then you can leave. And so giving folks, empowering them with proactive options to make their own decision based on whatever their alert, whatever their information is. I may need to fortify and barricade my space because of my evacuation route puts me in harm's way. For others, it may be I can get out of here because this threat is not in anywhere close proximity. They're on the other side of the building, and so the footprint and the blueprint should be an option-based strategy, allowing folks to make a decision, empowering them to make that decision to increase their survivability by taking a proactive stance. And if we continue to mandate, or if we mandate a one-size-fits-all approach, the question that has to be answered is that the right response for everybody? The answer will be sure. It can be the right response for some, but is it the right response for all? And that goes across the board with whatever their response is. And that's why those options are so important, because I need to make a decision about what's best for the space I'm in, the people I'm with, and how we can increase our survivability, which may be a different approach or a different option for the folks right across the hall. We go back and we look at Virginia Tech. You look at Professor Nebraska in classroom 204 and the other professor in classroom 205. 2 different options were taken there. Professor Nebraska instructed his students to evacuate out of the window, when the students and faculty in 205 fortified and barricaded. And they both yielded some success in those options. And so empowering people with those options to make those decisions, I think is key. It's important.
So
Guy,
weigh in on that.
Please.
Sorry, if I could weigh in on Brandon's point. Well, I think about when we look at a school's mission is, education, right? Academic performance, that it's, but I would say when we empower people, it enables those teachers to teach, those students to learn, and it also empowers the community to function every day, to not worry about their loved ones working in the schools. And when we empower people, thank God, most of these people are never going to experience anything like that. But but when they're seeing Uvalde all across the nation, it creates fear. And when we empower people, it helps them, as Brandon is saying, having those options and having that mindset, it kind of alleviates that fear, and they're able to focus on being educated. And if we look at what's going on right now, in our country, and it's kind of disturbing, we have teachers that are, and staff members in schools, they've left, they're not coming back, and I would say a lot of that is Uvalde and the post-COVID impact. We gotta, like Brandon said, we gotta empower people to be understanding of the threats that they're dealing with, and how they can be mitigated, and empower them. Or we're going to fail. We're not going to have teachers. We're not going to have, we're going to have kids that are not going to be educated. And that's our mission here. And I think we look at folks like Chris and Brandon and myself, when we work in schools, we're just as important as a teacher when we're educating students. I think that's something here and staff, to make them feel comfortable on a day by day basis, would be in there. We got to get back to that.
So how do you convey this to teachers, and especially substitute teachers? Mary, our administrator at ZeroNow, shared this conversation she had over the weekend with a friend of hers who's a substitute. She has no idea what to do if there was an active shooter situation in her school. She's not part of the training with the rest of the teachers. How do you communicate that to a substitute teacher or any teacher, what their options are, what they need to do if there's a situation? God forbid something happens. It's very unlikely, but if it does, how do you convey that to that individual?
I think a good plan. Brandon, you go ahead. Go ahead. I'm good, but go ahead.
I think there's a number of ways to do that, right? And one of the ways that I've seen in a couple of school districts that I've worked with is they make it a priority, right? And what they will do is they will provide the same opportunity to those subs, whether one particular school I'm talking about, they have in-house, another district uses a contract service, and they foot the bill for those employees to have the training, right? Because at any given day, any given sub could be in their building. And so, going back to, the priority of making sure that no matter who walks in that building, your 30-year veteran teacher or your 30-minute substitute, that they have the same education that everybody else has. And so we have to figure out ways and make it a priority. And that starts at the top, right? That starts at the top with the leader. What is the leadership perspective, and what are the leaders' priorities for the organization? And when those are defined and aligned, that is really easy for anybody to see what's important.
I think, Brandon, it goes back to what you said about having, and Gordon and Chris, too, about having individuals that are your security oversight or your emergency preparedness oversight, and putting those protocols. When you hire a teacher, to be a substitute, before you stick them in a school, they should have some all hazards type emergency preparedness. And there's ways to do that. You can do it in short bits and pieces. You don't want to just throw somebody to the wolves, without some kind of training. And I think the holistic way for us in K through 12 is, okay, it's not just ABCs, it's now safety and life safety skills that we need to empower these teachers to when they go and work in there. Not just teachers, substitutes, substitute custodians, just everybody needs to be aware of what they're coming into. And that's why we're losing people, because we're not doing that.
Chris. One thing to your point, guys, we with COVID, Chris, give me 15 seconds and I'll be right.
14,
but
13.
we with COVID, we got really good at mastering e-learning and virtual learning, and so there's really almost no excuse, right? There's really almost no excuse to be able to find a way to make that happen. Again, whether it's through a virtual, whether it's through an e-learning course, we've figured out how to make this work through this COVID time. And so that's just another avenue to be able to put this type of information in the hands of those substitutes folks.
And one last thing before I get to Chris. As Brandon said, many school districts, their human resources departments have a training program that provides online training. They have to do that for, legal reasons. Many districts have that. So you could add that into your training regime and have that be online, that mandatory training that you receive from that. Now, I would be brand agnostic here, but there are several companies that school districts are purchasing from that you can put your trainings on there. And before you come into that school, you have to attend that training.
Now, Chris.
Hey, all right.
Waiting very patiently.
I'm just teasing. Brandon and I jab at each other all the time. He's gotten the best of me like 4 out of 5 of these. So I just had a makeup to do. That's all.
Nice.
All good. Hey, I would just like to say these things, right? And I try to bring this back to human, right? And Ara, you know this personally. Everything I've built, right? And when I say I'm talking about a lot of people behind me. It's the rock, it's the mountain. We've all climbed it together. And we have built something that's everlasting, but I did it on a human model, not a business model, right? And people chastise me all the time, Chris, you need to, whatever, monetize, charge, whatever. The reality is each one of the companies that have something to offer, similar to what Guy said, different programs, like Brandon represents, different philosophy, like ZeroNow, the partnerships that support what you have. If we don't start taking a look at it like holistically, and I've said that word so many times, I'm talking about the inside out, the outside in, and building that layered onion, it's as simple as this. And here's some really hard facts for you, but I want to humanize them because it's not like, oh, hey, let's go beat up everybody. It's hard facts. If I'm in a classroom and I get sick and a substitute comes in and there's a fire that day, 99.9% of the substitutes are going to just know what to do because they've been trained, whether it was at that school or somewhere else. The issue that we have with active shooters it's not understood, it's not something that's intuitive, and it's something that we're all afraid of. And until we get comfortable with talking about these types of events and then turn the worst, which would be an active shooter or a terrorism event, into what Guy said, all hazards, and let it float down instead of float up, and you have the mushroom effect, let's tackle them all. So if I build a school in Texas, it costs $15 million for one building times X amount of buildings within the campus. That's like an average, right? It's probably pretty historical for around the country. If I want to fortify a building to make it active shooter proof, if you will, right? Like if nothing is fireproof, but we don't kill kids in fires anymore. So we can make it an active shooter proof, if you will, without creating an active shooter department, without building a new building, without coming up with new standards and police and firefighters and active shooter experts. You can just layer these in. And here come a couple props, and they're coming your way because you're the founder of OmniAlert. But information is gold, and especially in those first minutes, first seconds of those shots, information is key. OmniAlert does that for you, right? Let's get before the bang and go before that. Here's an Awareness product, one of a kind. It takes all the information Guy and Brandon said, takes it from the 4 silos, because we have information hotlines coming out of everywhere. And after Sandy Hook, all we did was add 3 more. So now those information hotlines do not share information. So you bring in a quality product like Awareness, it merges that information, releases it from the silos, sends it out to the appropriate people, and you can take action. And now you don't need to activate OmniAlert. But if you do, OmniAlert exists. Then you say, okay, I have a gun denied zone for 100 yards like at Uvalde before the kid gets in there. And they've got this weapon detection software that OmniAlert puts on there. And it says, boom. And it goes back to what Guy and Brandon said, cameras, doors, locked, record, start broadcasting messages, OmniAlert activated, Awareness, who's doing it. Then go forward to the other side, shelter in place. Where are you sheltering? Hey, you're in a classroom with a one-of-a-kind ballistic shield like a wing shield. Not only wing shield, but something like that. That's 100 code. The pin the first responder? Me, my child, whomever. So how do I get those people equipped? Well, gunshot detection systems can call 911 in under a second, half of a second. You've just shaved off 5 minutes from the event. You layer it like that, plus about 5 other things that you know what I'm talking about are, because I've shared these stories with you and they're published all over everywhere. Hell, you can go to my website, asppro.com, nothing to charge, nothing to sign up. It's free. It's right there. It's the model. Pick and choose. It's like an a la carte menu, and start somewhere. The hardest part about this whole conversation, where do I start? That's the number one question I get every day. Well, where do I start? And I tell them, look, X marks the spot, not me, but knowledge. Where do we start? If I don't know, Brandon knows. If Brandon doesn't know, Guy knows. And if we don't know, we know somebody that does with that 6-degree separation, and we can get started today. And I'm telling you, these technologies exist. We just need to get a preventative mindset like we have with fire, and we will go forward.
I would say everything you said, Chris, is quite true. And it all starts with a risk assessment, understanding what your risks are at the facilities and filling in your basics. But everything you brought up, I want to point out, they all should be unified together to work in coordination together. And you cannot do that without an access control system, the video management. Those are your eyes and your brain and your foundation. And that's where we're lacking in the schools, is when we talk about technological components, is that access control component and that the basic, because it can't do many of the things that you're talking about without that and that foundation. And when we look at that, we got to build these foundations in the schools.
Exactly, and Guy and Chris, when you're talking about technology, and one of the most important considerations, going back to the whole model, when prevention fails, how quickly can we respond to mitigate the scope of harm, right? To get to no harm. If we can respond instantly, like Chris mentioned, let's say that a firearm is detected before someone enters the school, being able to instantly lock the doors with an access control system. If the person's in a hallway, how quickly can you notify parents, people in the classroom, take over the smart boards? How quickly can you summon first responders and law enforcement? And the key thing, guys, and we're all talking about this, is when it comes to technology, and technology is a tool. I mean, everything is about the human element. It's a tool for humans. The technologies that you do use should be integrated and have the ability to be automated, because if we can limit the scope, the time of a detection to the time to respond and activate your protocols, look at your options. Now you have an additional 30 seconds to consider your options, to run, whatever the situation is. It gives you that much time to be able to respond and act. So, but having technology that's completely integrated, that has the ability to be automated together, is absolutely critical. And to Guy's point, it all starts with a risk assessment. Let's look at where your current situation is, and then from there, let's look at what technologies, what training, what protocols, what policies need to be built around that. Because it is very tempting to there's always a shiny new technology that this will solve everything, and that's not true. And one of you mentioned the fact that you need to have technology will fail, and so somebody mentioned gunshot detection. Well, that's great, but it's nice to also be able to prevent a gun from being deployed in the first place. So having visual gun detection, be able to identify a firearm. If that does not catch it, then, God forbid, the firearm is deployed. Now you have the ability to respond instantly because you have gunshot detection with cameras and audible detection and other emergency notification systems and interoperability with communications like Mutual Link and some other technologies. So all these things need to work together. And the theme that you keep hearing, folks, is holistic. And we're not, you notice that this discussion it's not banning guns versus mental health. It is about all the aspects that goes into active shooter prevention in schools and looking at how we can prevent this from happening. And I'm sorry, I went on my soapbox. We have a bunch of questions that came in from registrants. I promise we get through to some of these here because we only have a few minutes. But like I said, if you want to continue this conversation, I would encourage any of the participants to, if you're not a ZeroNow member, go to zeronow.org, click join. We're launching a new community so we could discuss these offline all the time, 24/7. Share your experiences with Guy and Chris and Brandon. All right, take a look here. We have one here. So this is actually Richard from the Walt Disney Company. Has anyone shared whether the first responding officers on the scene had been trained in active shooter response? I think, Chris, you're pretty close to this. Were they actually trained in active shooter response at Uvalde?
Yeah, there's so many police agencies involved and so many federal agencies as well. I will just tell you there was alert, right? The alert is this national standard for police to respond. There were people trained in the alert method, didn't follow protocols, period.
We talked about architecture just a while ago. Cynthia from the Georgiana School asked, how do you protect students and staff when your building is constructed with glass everywhere from ceiling to floor? Building, because a lot of new construction has that type of design aspect. Who wants to take that?
I'll do a 10-second one really quick, and that is glass is not inhibitant. It's actually a good thing. We have to evolve with architectural and aesthetic means that are good for learning, environments, etc. And I know the studies that went behind that. You have to find a good company that sells film, right? You can't shoot in, but you can shoot out type thing. The problem is once the fortress becomes, the reverse kingdom captured, just like Uvalde did, what's your plan? So you have to have an idea of these types of technologies, play the what if game and pick your poison where you want to start and keep building on it every budget year. And pretty soon you have that onion complete and won't make you cry.
I would say that's absolutely critical. But a lot of these schools, when they're putting this glass in, they're not putting that protective glass or that shielded glass or the glass film in there. And I think that's a problem. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to take the appropriate measures to harden that glass. But also, too, when the students are in that classroom, the staff are in that classroom, empowering them where their safe areas are going to be when that situation is in there, and giving them options. What do they do when they are in that room? That's absolutely critical. So it's all about unified security, life safety components to the tech, the glass and knowledge you're deploying in that school. Everybody needs to understand that.
Brandon, thoughts on that?
I'll go back to my last 30-second comment. Do we have the right people at the table from the design?
And that's part of the equation. That is, the design is part of the equation. Going back to 1958, Chris Grollnek in school fires at schools. That's part of the whole approach, the physical design. We're going to take one more question, then I want to hear your final thoughts. And this one, hey, Shane Goodwin asks, so how, and this could be its entire discussion in itself. So if one of you wants to take a shot at this, by all means. So how do you break down political barriers in district where anything having to do with safety or security as a proactive preventative measure is not recognized because administrators are reluctant to have any message that portrays school being an unsafe place to the public? We don't want to put this stuff in here because we're concerned that this will be perceived as an unsafe place. Chris,
what's your return on regret, right? You can't measure it because it's going to be absolute and it's going to be devastating. So why not just take a return on prevention, take the pass and say thank you very much?
I will speak from a current sitting school board vice president. It has to become a norm. It has to become a standard. And like anything else, there are tough conversations. But I think it was Chris or Guy or a combination. We have to be okay with the uncomfortable and get to a point where we are able to be honest with ourselves and address the needs of what is actually the things that need to be addressed within our school system and prioritize those needs. And until we get to the position where we're comfortable with that conversation, perception is what it is, right? You can talk about all day long, well, this makes us look this way and this makes us look that way. Well, how about we flip the coin to the glass half full side and we go, we're doing the right thing because it's the right in the right way for the right reason to protect kids. So why don't we change the message from this makes us look unsafe to we're going to do everything that we can humanly possibly do to make sure that we're safe, and change the narrative and the perspective of what you're looking from that to do from a safety standpoint in a school system.
Guy, thoughts on that?
I look at it a lot of times when a school's going for funding, especially on a bond initiative, for example, and as a school board member, security can help build the other bond measures. And you look at what safety and security is often in the top 4 of the concerns of your public, right now it's probably number 1 or 2 across the country. And I think that's quite critical when you look at it, that I'm not saying it should be to sell, but I think parents expect now, the communities expect the schools to have strong safety and security practices. If you don't, I believe that's where you're going to get into trouble, is because that perception is that your school is unsafe, is because you don't have these measures and things in place. It's going to be a bad thing for you. And you're looking at, I would challenge anybody around here, look around the country, and I bet you if you look at the really school districts that are doing higher academic performance, I bet you look at their safety and security measures, they're probably pretty sound. They're pretty robust. And I think there's a strong correlation between academic performance and security in schools. Strong security, strong academic performance. We're not talking about turning schools into prisons. We're talking about holistic things running in the background, the life safety components, the technological components, all running together. And I believe that. I believe high academic performance is supported by safe and strong schools.
Amen. And we run out of time, but 30 seconds, final thoughts, words of wisdom. And folks, we had a ton of questions, and we're gonna, before next week, we'll send out a link to the replay of this, but we'll also have a key takeaways document where we'll have some resources for you and answers to some of your questions. But last final words of wisdom, Chris, for our participants, 30 seconds.
How about 15? There's no one answer. Not one right answer is going to solve 100 different problems. There's no magic proverbial bullet or pill. Don't fall into a lull. And don't think because we just said, hey, you have glass everywhere, put film on it. You put film up, you don't need another plan. That is one of probably 14 other things you need to do. Start from the ground up. Don't go from the top down. Look from within and hire a consultant, or just ask somebody, and ask 5 people, get the right answer. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Chris. Guy, final words of wisdom, parting thoughts.
I would say everybody go back, look at the basics, start with your risk assessments in your schools, look at what your vulnerabilities are, look at what is likely to happen, look at the situations, and build upon that. Also, do away with the silos, encourage the unification between the silos of mental health, learning, law enforcement, fire, nursing. Everybody work together, build those safe school teams in your school district, and build a unified command within your school district to respond to these emergencies.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And Mr. Rhone, final thoughts, words of wisdom.
When the time to perform has come, the time to prepare has passed.
You said it. All right. No, thanks, guys. No, that's absolutely correct. I think the biggest key takeaway from this whole thing is we need to take a holistic approach, engage your community. Let's prevent this from happening. Let's not wait to respond. If we have to respond, then let's put the infrastructure in place, policies, procedures, technology in place to mitigate the scope of harm. Just as a reminder, our next session's webinar, we're going to continue this discussion, but more on a cultural, mental health and public health perspective. September 20th, we'll have the registration ready tomorrow, if not this afternoon. Go to ZeroNow.org, click join to be a member of this, participate in our discussions. Like I said, we're launching a new community platform, which is like a social media platform, but just all about school safety. All about sharing ideas, funding opportunities, discussing these best practices. What are some ways that we could work together to accomplish zero harm, like 1958. Let's make that 2028 the year that we get to zero harm in schools. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Guy and Chris and Brandon. Wish we could stay on afterwards, but once this ends, we're all gone. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Take care.